The night is a good time to think about letters. Not emails, not quick messages that vanish into a scroll of notifications, but real letters. Ink on paper, folded carefully, sealed with wax, carried by hands that had to cross weather and distance. A letter is slow by nature. It requires patience at every step, to write, to send, to wait, to receive. And because of that, the history of the post is also a history of waiting, of hope held quietly in the days between departure and arrival. So make yourself comfortable. Imagine a small room lit by a single lamp. The light is warm and it gathers on the surface of a wooden desk. There's a sheet of paper waiting. A pen rests beside it. Outside, the world is dark and quiet. Inside, a person leans forward, thinking of someone far away, searching for the right words. Before the letter can begin its journey, it has to become a thing, physical, foldable, sealable. The pen scratches softly. Ink dries slowly. The writer folds the paper with care, as if the fold itself is part of the message. Then comes the seal, wax softened by flame, a stamp pressed down, the impression cooling into a small, hard promise. And then the letter leaves the room. In the ancient world, messages traveled as fast as a person could travel. That sounds simple, but it is an enormous limitation. A human body has needs: food, rest, shelter. Roads can be smooth or broken, safe or dangerous, depending on who controls the land and what season it is. Rain can turn a road into glue. Snow can erase it. Heat can slow everything down to a crawl. So early postal systems, where they existed, often belonged to power. Rulers needed information to move faster than rumor. Orders had to reach distant officials. Reports had to return. Taxes, troop movements, legal decisions. None of it worked without communication. And the more territory an empire controlled, the more it needed a reliable way to send words across that territory. One of the most important inventions in the history of mail is not a stamp or an envelope, but a simple idea: the relay. Instead of sending one messenger to run the entire distance, you build stations along the route. A rider arrives, hands over the message, and a fresh rider takes it onward. Or the rider changes horses, keeping speed high. Or both. The message becomes a baton, passed from hand to hand, moving across the map in steady leaps. If you could stand beside one of these relay stations, you would hear a certain rhythm, hooves approaching, a brief flurry of movement, a shouted name or a signal. A leather pouch transferred quickly. A horse turned around, another horse brought forward. Then the rider is gone again, swallowed by dust or mist. It's a strange kind of motion, fast in bursts, slow in total. The message is urgent, but the world is large. Some empires built relay networks with impressive sophistication. They understood that a road is not just dirt. A road is an agreement. It requires maintenance, security, rules, and resources. A network of stations requires fresh animals, food, people trained to handle pressure and fatigue. It is a system that has to keep working even when the weather is bad and the politics are worse. And yet, for most ordinary people, for most of history, mail was not a public service. It was a privilege. Sending a letter across long distances often required access, connections, money, or someone traveling who could carry your words as a favor. The everyday person's postal service might be a merchant heading to another town, a soldier returning home, a pilgrim moving along a known route. Letters in that world were woven into travel. A message might sit in a pocket for weeks, carried across mountains, kept dry under a cloak, protected from theft and rain. It might be handed over at an inn, left with a trusted contact, passed along with a nod and a promise. I will deliver this when I can. And still, letters moved. Slowly, steadily, like rivers finding their way around stones. Now imagine what it felt like to wait for one. In a world without instant confirmation, sending a letter was like releasing a bird into the dark. You had no tracking number, no estimated delivery time, no guarantee. You might not even know if the person was still alive when your words reached their town. And yet people wrote anyway, because the need to speak across distance is older than convenience. There is something deeply human in that, the courage of sending words into uncertainty. As time passed, more formal postal systems expanded. Cities grew, states became more bureaucratic, trade intensified, and gradually the idea of a postal service began to shift, away from being purely for rulers and toward becoming something wider. Not always fair, not always accessible, but wider. The infrastructure that made this possible was often simple and physical. Roads improved, inns became regular stopping points, official routes were mapped, schedules began to exist. The world started to develop predictable pathways for moving paper. And paper is light. Paper is small. But paper carries weight. A letter can carry love, fear, news of a death, a marriage proposal, a business agreement, a confession. It can carry a piece of a person's voice. It can carry the feeling of their hand, the pressure of their pen. And because of that, the post became something more than logistics. It became an emotional system. In the next part, we'll drift into some of the most famous and influential courier networks, how organized posts functioned across long distances, how roads and stations shaped empires, and how the post slowly began to touch ordinary lives. We'll also linger in the atmosphere, the roadside inns, the tired horses, the lantern-lit stations, the quiet moment when a sealed letter changes hands and becomes someone else's responsibility. For now, let the first letter remain in your mind, folded, sealed, warm from the writer's hands, a small object stepping out into a vast night, trusting the world to carry it forward. Imagine the road at dawn, not the clean road of a modern highway, but a road made of compacted earth and old stones, patched and worn by generations of feet and hooves. The air is cold enough to wake you fully. Grass along the edges is wet with dew. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls once, then goes quiet again. Along this road, the post moves like a living thing, sometimes quick, sometimes delayed, always vulnerable. To understand how letters crossed empires, it helps to picture the postal station. A station is not grand. It doesn't need to be. It is simply a dependable place in an unpredictable world, a roof that keeps rain off paper, a stable where fresh horses wait, a hearth for warmth, a ledger to record who arrived and who left. A person who knows the rules, who recognizes official seals, who understands that certain pouches must move faster than others. If you were standing nearby, you might see a rider emerge out of the morning mist, posture stiff from hours in the saddle. The horse is damp with sweat under its blanket. The rider dismounts quickly. Someone else steps forward, already ready. There's no long conversation. The pouch is handed over, the seal checked, the next horse brought out. Then the next rider is gone. And just like that, a message continues. Relay systems are a brilliant solution to a simple problem. Bodies get tired. A single messenger can travel far, but not fast for long. A relay system respects fatigue. It trades endurance for efficiency. It allows the message to remain fresh, even as the messenger changes. It's the same logic as passing a torch in a race. The goal is not to protect one runner's pride, but to protect speed. Some relay networks were so well organized that messages could travel astonishing distances with surprising regularity, at least when the system wasn't disrupted by war, storms, or politics. But even in the best circumstances, the post depended on fragile things: a bridge that hadn't collapsed, a station that hadn't been raided, a horse that hadn't gone lame, a rider who didn't fall ill. This is why postal history is always also about risk. Now, let's drift through a few kinds of postal travel, because not all letters crossed land the same way. Sometimes a message moved by a mounted courier, fast and official. Sometimes by a foot messenger, slower but more flexible in rough terrain. Sometimes by wagon or stagecoach, able to carry more at once but depended on roads, weather, and security. And sometimes by ship, because oceans, for all their danger, could connect places no road ever could. Each mode of travel shaped the letter's experience. A rider could keep a pouch close, protected by the urgency of speed. A wagon might carry sacks of mail among barrels and cargo, jostling over ruts. A ship might store letters in a captain's care, tucked into a dry space below deck, where sea air and dampness constantly threatened paper. If you've ever held a very old letter, you can sometimes see the journey in its body. The softening at the folds, the slight discoloration, the faint smear where moisture once tried to enter. Letters are not just text. They're objects that have survived. Now think about the people who handled them. Postal work was not only riding and running. It was sorting, recording, guarding, negotiating. It was also, in many places, a job with moral weight. If you worked at a station, you held private words in your hands. You could be tempted to read them. You could be bribed to delay them. You could be threatened to destroy them. A postal system requires trust not only in infrastructure, but in human restraint. And because trust is fragile, many systems relied on seals. Wax seals are a kind of quiet technology. They don't stop someone from opening a letter, but they reveal it. The seal says, "This was meant to arrive untouched." Breaking it is an act, not an accident. It turns curiosity into a visible violation. You can imagine the small ritual at the receiving end. A person takes the letter and turns it in the light. They look at the seal. Is it intact? Is the impression clear? Does it carry the familiar signet of the sender? In that moment, before the letter is opened, there is a pause filled with possibilities. The letter might bring relief. It might bring grief. It might bring nothing more than ordinary news, and even that can feel precious when it traveled so far. Then the seal is broken. That crack in the wax is a sound history used to make often, a tiny snap that opened weeks of waiting into a few lines of ink. Now, as postal systems expanded, they began to shape geography in return. When a route becomes official, it attracts services,
Inns, blacksmiths, stables, small markets. Travelers prefer the safer, maintained road. Merchants follow.
Towns along the route become more connected. The post does not only follow civilization. In a quiet way, it helps build it. And still, for most people, the post remained uneven. Faster for the powerful, slower for the ordinary. Many letters traveled as hitchhikers in human networks, carried by acquaintances, by traders, by soldiers, by anyone moving in the right direction. This creates a particular kind of letter-writing style, one shaped by uncertainty. Writers often packed more into a single letter because they didn't know when the next chance would come. They repeated key news in case pages were lost. They wrote in ways that assumed delay. They apologized for silence they couldn't control. And the waiting changed relationships. When you only hear from someone every few months, you learn to live with gaps. You learn to hold affection at a distance. You learn patience the way you learn weather, by enduring it. In the next part, we'll step into the soundscape of the roadside post, coaching inns, stage routes, and the more public idea of mail. We'll also begin to feel the sea more strongly, packet boats, storms, and the way ocean mail made distance feel both smaller and more terrifying. For now, stay on the dawn road. Hear the hoofbeats fade. Picture the station returning to stillness, waiting for the next rider. The pouch is gone, the message carried forward, and the road remains, quiet, damp, and patient, holding the invisible traffic of human words. The road widens as the world becomes busier. Where the relay rider is a streak of urgency, the stagecoach is a steady heartbeat. Heavy wheels, predictable stops, schedules that try to hold shape even when weather refuses. The stagecoach belongs to a more public era of mail, when letters are no longer only the nervous system of rulers, but increasingly the connective tissue of ordinary life. Imagine a coaching inn at dusk. Lanterns glow in the windows. The air smells of wet leather, straw, and wood smoke. Inside, a fire crackles. People talk quietly over simple food. Outside, someone listens for wheels, because the coach does not arrive silently. It announces itself with a distant rumble, a rhythmic clatter that grows louder, then suddenly fills the yard. Horses snort, harnesses jingle. The coach swings in, mud-spattered, carrying passengers and parcels and, somewhere among them, a bag of mail tied and sealed. The mail is treated differently from everything else. Cargo can wait. Passengers can complain. But the mail is supposed to keep moving. There is a little dance that happens quickly in the yard. A fresh team is brought out. The driver exchanges a few brisk words. The mailbag is transferred, sometimes without even unloading the coach fully. A man with a list checks names and seals. The bag disappears into a safer room for a moment, then reappears, ready for the next leg. Then the coach is gone again, leaving behind hoof prints, wheel tracks, and a settling quiet. For people waiting in towns along the route, the arrival of the post could shape the entire day. It meant news. It meant money orders, legal papers, invitations, condolences. It meant the possibility of a changed life folded inside paper. In places where literacy increased and paper became more affordable, letter writing became more common. People began to maintain relationships across distance not only through memory, but through words carried by strangers. The post created a kind of long-distance intimacy. You could speak to someone you might not see for years and still feel their presence in your hands. But this new public mail also created new problems. Volume. Once many people are sending letters, they need sorting. They need rules about payment. They need standardized routes, regular departures, reliable systems for identifying where a letter should go. A postal service becomes not just transport, but organization. Addresses become important. Street names and house numbers matter. Postmarks appear. Schedules are posted. The abstract idea of somewhere begins to sharpen into a system that can be navigated by paper. And with system comes the strange comfort of expectation. When people begin to know that the post arrives every Tuesday, or that a ship leaves port on a certain date, waiting becomes structured. It still hurts, but it becomes a kind of calendar. Time is measured not only by seasons, but by mail days. Now, let's take the letter to the sea, because empires, especially those stretched across oceans, depended on ship mail. And ship mail is a different kind of waiting, larger, more uncertain, more haunted by weather. Imagine a harbor at night. Masts rise like dark forests. Ropes creak. The water shifts against the docks. In a warehouse, sacks of mail sit among cargo, protected as best as they can be from damp. A clerk checks manifests. A captain signs papers. Someone seals the mailbag again, because seawater is relentless and curiosity is human. Then the ship departs. At first, the coast remains visible, a thin line. Then it fades. The ship becomes a moving island, and the letters aboard it become sleeping passengers, silent, folded, waiting for land. On the ocean, time stretches. A crossing might take weeks. Storms can push ships off course. Calm winds can stall them. A ship can disappear entirely, swallowed by weather and bad luck, taking every letter with it. This is why ocean mail carried a special emotional weight. If your letter was on a ship, you had to accept that the sea might decide its fate. And if you were waiting for a letter from across the ocean, you lived with a particular kind of uncertainty. Not only when will it arrive, but will it arrive at all? In that uncertainty, people became skilled at imagining. They imagined ships battling waves, imagined mailbags stored in chests below deck, imagined sailors guarding them, imagined the moment of arrival, harbor bells, crowds, the sudden appearance of familiar handwriting after months of silence. And when the letter did arrive, it could feel miraculous. A piece of paper so small, surviving so much. Now, in the next part, we'll step deeper into the emotional life of letters. What people wrote, how they wrote when time was slow, how separation shaped language. We'll also touch the quiet technologies that made mail safer and more efficient. Seals, bags, routes, and the gradual move toward something closer to modern reliability. For now, stay at the coaching inn for a moment longer. Hear the coach fade down the road, wheels diminishing into the dark. Feel the warmth from the inn windows. Somewhere inside, a sealed bag of mail rests briefly on a table, guarded and counted. In a world that cannot be rushed, that bag is a small promise. Your words are on the move. A letter is a strange kind of time capsule. It doesn't only carry news. It carries the exact moment the writer sat down, what they knew then, what they feared then, what they chose to mention, and what they left unsaid. And when you read a letter that traveled slowly, you often feel the distance twice, the distance across the map and the distance across time. Imagine someone writing by candlelight. The flame leans slightly in a draft. Shadows move on the wall. The writer pauses often, not because they lack words, but because the words have to do more work. When you can't speak tomorrow, you try to put more of yourself into the page today. In the age of slow mail, letters were often longer. They had a different texture. They weren't just messages. They were visits. A person might describe the weather in detail, not because the weather was important, but because sharing weather was a way of sharing place. They might describe small daily routines, meals, a new coat, a neighbor's illness, a child's growth. These ordinary details were proof of life. They were the gentle way of saying, "I am still here. The world is still turning. You are not fully alone in your distance." There is also a careful kindness in old letters. The way people tried to soften bad news. The way they arranged grief in paragraphs. The way they delayed the hardest sentence, hoping the reader would be ready by the time they reached it. And because mail was uncertain, people developed habits that now feel almost tender. They would date letters precisely because the date mattered. They would sometimes number pages because pages could be separated. They would sometimes repeat the most important information near the end, in case the beginning was damaged. They would sometimes write in small, dense script to conserve paper, or cross their writing at right angles, filling every available space, because postage and paper could be expensive. The material conditions shaped the style of affection. Now imagine the receiving end. The post arrives in town. Someone walks to the designated place, an office, an inn, a station, and asks if there is anything for them. The clerk looks down a list. There is a pause that feels too long. Then, perhaps, the clerk reaches under the counter and brings out a letter. The recipient recognizes the hand immediately, and in that recognition, the body responds before the mind does. A little rush of warmth, a tightening in the throat, a sudden quiet. The letter is held carefully, as if it might break. The seal is touched, not yet broken. The outside of the envelope is read again and again, because sometimes the outside is all you have for a moment. Then comes the opening, a small tear, the crack of wax, the unfolding, the first line. And now the world changes shape because someone far away is suddenly close. This is why postal systems mattered so much. They did not only serve governments, they served longing. But longing has enemies: delay, loss, interception. So postal services, where they grew strong, had to build not only speed, but trust. They had to become reliable enough that people would dare to attach their feelings to paper. In some places, that reliability was enforced by law. Interfering with the mail became a serious offense. Postal workers swore oaths. Routes were protected. Bags were sealed and counted. The mail became sacred in a practical way, not because it was holy, but because society depended on it. At the same time, the mail was never perfectly private. States have always been tempted to read letters. In times of fear, governments built systems of surveillance, opening mail, copying contents, resealing. In some eras, this was done quietly and routinely, justified as security. For ordinary people, it meant that intimacy could be exposed. A letter, once sent, could be held by many hands. This tension between connection and vulnerability runs through postal history like a thread. And still people wrote, because the need to reach across distance is stronger than the fear of being overheard. Most of the time, people take the risk. They fold their words, seal them, and trust a system they do not control. Now, another quiet technology enters the story: the stamp and standardized payment. Once postage becomes more systematic, sending letters becomes easier for more people. The system shifts toward prepayment, toward regularized rates, toward a postal service that feels more public and less like a patchwork of favors and private couriers. And with that shift, mail becomes more ordinary, more frequent, more woven into daily life. People begin to expect letters. They begin to plan around them. They begin to live in a world where distant relationships can be maintained not only through rare visits, but through steady paper. It is hard to describe how revolutionary that is without sounding dramatic. But in human terms, it's simple. You can miss someone less when their words can find you. And yet, even as mail becomes more regular, it remains slow enough to preserve a certain emotional rhythm, a rhythm we've largely lost. When you wait weeks for a reply, you learn to sit with uncertainty. You learn not to demand immediate reassurance. You learn to hold questions open. You learn to live in the space between sending and receiving. That space shaped people. It shaped patience. It shaped imagination. It shaped how love and grief were carried. In the next part, we'll drift into some of the most atmospheric scenes of postal life. The post office as a community center, the sorting rooms at night, the sound of stamps and paper, the quiet laborer behind reliability. And we'll follow the mail into harsher conditions, winter routes, dangerous roads, and the small heroism of simply delivering a letter when the world tries to stop you. For now, let the letter rest in your hands. Let the paper be real. Let the ink be slightly uneven, as handwriting always is. Let the words be warm simply because they were written by a person who was thinking of you somewhere else, under another sky. And let the waiting, the old, slow waiting, feel for a moment like a softer kind of time. Now the story moves into a quieter room, not the room where the letter is written, and not the room where it is opened, but the room in between, where the letter becomes one of many, and where the work of delivering hope is done by routine. Imagine a post office in the evening. Outside, the street has grown still. Inside, lamps glow over wooden counters and shelves. There is the faint smell of paper and dust and ink. Behind the public area, beyond the place where people ask for their mail, there is another space that most customers never see: the sorting room. In the sorting room, the mail is no longer personal. It is volume. It is sacks and bundles, strings tied tightly around stacks of letters. It is labels, stamps, routes. It is hands moving quickly, eyes trained to recognize place names and patterns. The work is repetitive, but it is not mindless. A sorter must be accurate. A small mistake, one letter placed in the wrong bundle, can become weeks of delay. And in a world where letters carry life-changing news, delay is not trivial. It is an emotional event. So the sorting becomes a kind of quiet discipline. Letters are arranged by destination, city, region, route. Bags are sealed, lists are checked. There is a steady rhythm to it. Pick up, read, place. Pick up, read, place. The soft slap of paper, the scrape of a chair, a stamp pressed down with a firm, satisfying motion. If you've ever watched someone good at a repetitive task, you know how calming it can be. Efficiency becomes a kind of choreography. The hands know what to do. The mind settles into the pattern. And then, when the sorting is done, the mail must move again. This is where the post becomes physical labor, Mailbags are heavy when full. They are lifted, carried, loaded onto wagons or coaches. They are hauled onto ships. They are dragged through snow. They are protected from rain under oilcloth. They are carried into stations at night and handed off by lantern light. It's easy to forget, in our modern ease, how much muscle once went into moving words. Now, let's step outside into winter, because winter is one of the great tests of any postal system. Snow makes roads disappear. Ice turns paths into danger. Wind steals warmth from fingers so quickly that tying a knot can become difficult. Horses slip, wheels sink, rivers swell or freeze. In deep winter, a letter's journey can slow to a crawl or stop entirely. And yet, in many places, the mail still tried to run. Imagine a driver wrapped in thick layers, face stung raw by cold air. The coach is slower now. The horses breathe hard, steam rising from their nostrils. Every mile costs more effort. The road is not smooth, it is rutted and hidden, sometimes guessed by memory and landmarks. A lamp swings gently at the front, its light weak against the vast dark. At the next station, the scene repeats. Quick transfer, minimal talking, hands working fast because fingers are losing feeling. Someone signs a ledger. Someone checks a seal. Someone takes the bag into warmth for a moment, as if warming the letters could also warm the lives inside them. This is one reason mail became a symbol of reliability in many societies. The post was a promise that the state, or the system, could reach you even in bad weather, even in difficult times. When the mail arrived, it meant the network was still alive, and when it didn't arrive, people felt it immediately. Silence wasn't just silence. Silence was a sign. Now, not all dangers were natural. There were also people who lived along roads with hungry eyes. Bandits, thieves, opportunists. A mailbag might contain money, documents, valuable news. Even when it didn't, it could be stolen simply because it was part of a system of power, and breaking that system was a form of resistance. So mail sometimes traveled with protection. In certain eras and routes, guards accompanied the post. In others, the system relied on speed and secrecy. In others, it relied on the simple fact that most people, most of the time, honored the idea that letters should pass unharmed. Because everyone eventually becomes a sender or a receiver, and a society that destroys mail destroys its own lifeline. Now pause with that thought. The mail is a shared trust. You might not know the person whose letter passes through your town, but you protect it anyway, because one day your words will need the same protection. That idea, quiet, cooperative, can feel almost radical. In the next part, we'll move forward into a world where mail becomes faster and more standardized. Trains, steamships, and the tightening of schedules. We'll also touch on the emotional shift that speed creates, how the meaning of waiting changes when a letter takes days instead of months, and how the post begins to feel like a modern pulse rather than a slow tide. For now, stay in the sorting room. Hear the soft music of paper. Imagine the last bag being tied shut, the knot pulled tight, a route label attached, a seal pressed into wax or stamped onto a tag. The bag lifted with effort, carried toward the door. And outside the night waits, wide and cold and patient, while human words, bundled in cloth and leather, begin another quiet crossing. The world speeds up in small increments, not all at once, not with a single invention, but with a series of changes that tighten time like a belt pulled one notch at a time. Roads improve, schedules become stricter, sorting becomes more efficient, and then railways arrive, and suddenly distance begins to feel different. Imagine a train station before sunrise. The platforms are dim, lamps glow in a row. The air smells of coal, metal, and damp stone. Somewhere, a locomotive exhales, a deep, heavy breath, steam rolling into the cold air like a cloud that can't decide whether to rise or sink. Mail in the railway age becomes something new, regular, fast, and massive. Instead of a single rider carrying a pouch, you have sacks and crates loaded into special compartments. Instead of uncertain departures, you have timetables. Instead of a road where anything can happen, you have rails, still vulnerable to storms and accidents, but more predictable than mud and ruts. And the post adjusts. Sorting becomes more industrial. Some systems create traveling post offices, mail sorted on the train itself while it moves, so delivery can happen even faster when the train arrives. Imagine the interior. Narrow aisles, racks of pigeonholes, clerks standing steady despite the sway, hands moving quickly as the landscape slides by outside the windows. It is an odd kind of intimacy, letters being handled while mountains and fields pass in silence beyond the glass. The railway doesn't only carry mail faster, it changes how people think about correspondence. If a letter might arrive in a few days rather than a few weeks, writing becomes less like carving something into stone and more like having a slow conversation. People can ask questions and expect answers before the season changes. They can share daily life more regularly. The emotional rhythm becomes tighter. Waiting shrinks. And when waiting shrinks, expectations grow. This is the paradox of speed. The faster the system becomes, the less tolerance people have for delay. A week of waiting once felt normal. Later it feels unbearable. The post, by becoming better, also becomes more demanding. Now, beyond trains, steamships transform ocean mail. A steamship is still at the mercy of the sea, but it is less dependent on wind. It can maintain schedules more reliably. It can carry more mail. It can turn the ocean from an unpredictable wilderness into a route, still dangerous, but more regular. Picture mail bags being loaded onto a steamship at a busy port. Dock workers move with practiced efficiency. A clerk checks lists. The bags are stowed in compartments meant to stay dry. The ship's horn sounds low and long. Lines are cast off. The ship pulls away, smoke trailing behind like a dark ribbon. And somewhere on board, in a locked space, are letters that will soon change lives on another shore. This is when global correspondence truly accelerates. Families split between continents can exchange words with less despair. Businesses can coordinate across oceans with more confidence. Governments can react to distant events with less lag. The world becomes more tightly stitched. But the post does not only move words, it also moves identity. Postmarks and stamps become symbols of place. People begin collecting stamps, admiring their designs, the faces and emblems that states choose to print. A small piece of paper becomes an artifact of national pride. Even the envelope begins to carry visual meaning. And meanwhile, within cities, mail becomes more organized too. Street addresses become more standardized. Delivery routes become daily habits. A person might hear the familiar sound of the post arriving, the slot opening, the soft thump of letters landing inside.
That sound becomes part of the domestic soundscape, as ordinary as footsteps on stairs. Now, for the people who work in the system, the pace becomes heavier. A faster network means more volume, more letters, more parcels, more pressure to deliver on time. Sorting rooms grow busier. Offices expand. Delivery workers, walking or cycling, carry bags that pull at shoulders day after day in all weather. There is something quietly heroic in that routine. Not dramatic heroism, not the kind that gets statues. The heroism of showing up, of moving through rain and heat, of being reliable. The postal worker becomes a familiar figure, a moving part of the neighborhood's rhythm. And with familiarity comes a strange trust. People share news with them, ask questions, look for reassurance. "Any mail for me today?" That question holds so much. It holds hope disguised as small talk. Now, as we approach the modern world, there is another shift that changes the emotional tone of letters. The arrival of faster communication, telegraphs first, then telephones, then the internet. When urgent news can travel instantly by wire, letters become less about urgency and more about depth. The letter becomes a slower, fuller form. It becomes again a kind of visit. And even in the age of instant messages, letters haven't completely disappeared. They've changed their meaning. A letter now is often a deliberate act, something you choose because it takes effort. A handwritten letter can feel intimate precisely because it is slow. It says, "I gave you time. I sat down. I stayed with my thoughts. I made something that can be held." This returns us to the quiet heart of postal history. Mail is the physical movement of attention. In the next part, we'll begin our closing arc, returning from infrastructure to human feeling. The romance and grief of correspondence, the artifacts people keep for decades, the way old letters become family memory. We'll also end where we began, at a desk, at night, with a lamp and a sheet of paper, because in the end, the entire system exists to serve that one simple moment, a person reaching for another person across distance. For now, let the train station fade, let the steam dissolve into the dark, and imagine, in a mailbag on a moving train, a single letter among thousands, quiet, folded, sealed, traveling toward the hands that have been waiting for it, counting days the way people used to count stars. Now we slow down again, because speed is only one half of the story, and the other half is what people do with slowness, how they live inside it, how they make it bearable, how they turn it into meaning. Letters, especially in the long centuries of slower mail, were often kept, not thrown away after being read, not treated as disposable, but saved in boxes, tied in bundles with ribbon, tucked into drawers beneath folded cloth. A letter could become a household object, handled carefully, reread in private, touched like a small relic of another person's presence. Imagine a wooden box. Inside it are stacks of paper in different hands. Some ink has faded to brown. Some pages are thin and fragile. Some are thicker with a rough texture. The edges are worn from being opened and closed many times. A dried flower might be pressed between two sheets. A small lock of hair might be tied inside a folded corner. A stain might mark a moment when tears fell without permission. This is the afterlife of the post. The system delivers the letter once. Love delivers it again and again. Old letters become family memory. They preserve voices that are otherwise lost.
They show how people spoke when they believed words mattered enough to be written slowly. They reveal tenderness, restraint, humor, fear, sometimes in ways the descendants never expected. And they reveal, too, the shape of daily life. What people ate, what the weather did, what news traveled, what illnesses frightened them, what small joys they held on to. A letter can be history with fingerprints. Now think about the emotions letters carried most often. Love, of course. Love in its many forms. Lovers separated by war or work. Spouses separated by travel. Children writing to parents. Friends writing across years. Love that tries to stay steady despite absence. But also grief. Letters carried news of death, often delayed. Sometimes a person received a letter from someone who had already died by the time the letter arrived. Imagine that moment, reading words written by a living hand, knowing the hand is now gone. It creates a strange double time, a haunting softness. The letter becomes a last echo. Letters also carried apologies, confessions, reconciliations, attempts to repair what distance and misunderstanding had broken. In an age without instant clarification, misunderstandings could stretch. Silence could be misread. A delayed reply could feel like rejection. So people wrote carefully, trying to manage the emotional risk of time. And yet, sometimes letters failed. They were lost. They were delayed beyond usefulness. They were destroyed by water, by fire, by war, by simple accident. A bag fell into a river. A ship sank. A station burned. A clerk misfiled a bundle. A thief took a pouch and threw the paper away after searching for money. When a letter failed to arrive, the absence became a message of its own. Silence could mean it was lost, or they did not reply, or they could not reply, or something happened. That uncertainty could be cruel. It is difficult to live with not knowing. The human mind tries to complete the story, and in doing so, it often invents pain. This is one reason the post mattered so much. It reduced the space in which imagination could become torment. But even in the best system, the space never disappeared entirely. Waiting remained. And waiting shaped culture. People planned courtships around postal schedules. Businesses timed shipments based on mail days. Soldiers and sailors measured time by letters received. Families held on to hope when the post brought nothing, telling themselves, next week, perhaps. Next month, perhaps the next ship. Now, return with me to a familiar scene. A post office window. A person stands in line. The room smells faintly of paper and varnished wood. The clerk's face is neutral, trained by routine. Names are called. Pouches and parcels are retrieved. And then, your name. The clerk hands over a letter. The weight is almost nothing, but the feeling is enormous. In that moment, you are holding proof that someone thought of you at a different time and took the trouble to reach you. You are holding the physical path their attention traveled, from their hand to a bag, to a road, to a station, to another bag, to another road, until it found you. If you look closely at the envelope, you might see the journey as marks, postmarks, smudges, creases, a softened corner. It's like a passport stamped by distance. Now, let the letter be opened. The first line is often simple, "My dear," or "I hope you are well,"
or "I write to tell you." The simplicity is part of the tenderness. The writer knows they must begin somewhere, and they begin with care. And as you read, you feel a small collapse of distance. The world becomes smaller. The person becomes closer. This is why people used to say that letters could keep a relationship alive. Not perfectly, not without longing, but alive. Now, as we close our journey, it's worth noticing something gentle. The post was one of humanity's earliest large-scale ways of moving intimacy through infrastructure.
Roads, stations, schedules, built not only for power and trade, but for the simple human need to say, "I'm here. I remember you. I want you to know my thoughts." Even today, in a world where messages arrive instantly, a letter still carries a special weight precisely because it is slow. It proves that time was given. So if you ever want to borrow a little of the old world softness, you can. You can write a letter. You can sit down, let the lamplight pool on paper, and let your hand move at the speed of thought rather than the speed of typing. You can fold the page, seal it, address it carefully. You can send it into the system, not because it's the fastest way, but because it's the gentlest. And if you're listening to this at night, you can let that idea settle like warm tea, a quiet act, a slow message, a kind of waiting. In the final part, we'll return to the desk where we began and let the story end the way many letters ended, with a simple closing, a wish for peace, and the hope that the words will arrive safely. For now, imagine the box of letters again. Close the lid softly. Let the paper rest in the dark, holding voices like sleeping birds, until someone opens the box and the past speaks once more. The desk is waiting. It's the same desk we began with, in the same quiet night. But it feels different now, because you can sense the invisible roads that radiate outward from it. Not roads of stone and mud, not rails and sea lanes, but routes of human attention. Every letter ever written was a small attempt to cross the dark with a little light. So let's end where letters often ended, gently. Imagine the writer again, returning to the page after a long paragraph. The hand is slightly tired. The ink level in the pen has dropped. The candle has burned lower, the pool of melted wax wider. Outside, the night has deepened. The writer pauses, not because they have nothing left to say, but because the end of a letter is its own moment. It's the moment when you have to accept that you cannot keep the person close forever. You have to fold the page. You have to let them go again. You have to trust the world to carry what you've made. So the writer chooses a closing. Perhaps it is formal, as many letters once were. Phrases shaped by tradition, by politeness, by the idea that certain words belonged at the end the way a seal belonged on the fold. Perhaps it is intimate and plain, the kind of ending that feels like a hand on the shoulder. Write soon. I miss you. Be safe. I'm thinking of you. Then the signature, a name written carefully because the name is a final touch of presence. It is the human stamp at the end of the page. Now the letter is folded. If it is a time before envelopes are common, the page might be folded into its own wrapper, the address written on the outside. If it is later, the page slips into an envelope, the flap pressed down, sealed. Wax is warmed, a stamp is pressed. The letter becomes closed, private, complete. For a moment it rests on the desk, a finished object, still warm from the writer's hands. And then it is carried out.
Perhaps the writer walks it to a post office in the morning.
Perhaps it is given to a messenger. Perhaps it is dropped into a box with a small metal mouth, and you hear the soft, final sound of paper falling inside, a quiet surrender to the system. From there, the letter joins the larger flow. It will be sorted under lamps. It will be tied into bundles. It will be placed into a bag with other people's hopes and news. It will ride in a coach over rutted roads. It will travel by train through fields and cities. It will cross water on a ship that creaks at night. It will pass through stations where people do not know its contents, but still protect it because that is the agreement. Letters must move. And eventually, if the world is kind, it will arrive. At a counter, through a slot, into a hand. And then the entire journey becomes invisible, replaced by the intimacy of reading. That is the magic of the post. It turns infrastructure into closeness. It turns a network into a moment. Now, in your own room, if you listen carefully, you might notice how different our time is, and how similar. We no longer wait weeks for a reply in most cases. We no longer imagine ships and storms for ordinary messages. But we still crave the same thing: to be remembered, to be reached, to feel that someone else's mind touched ours. The old postal world simply made that craving more visible, because it forced people to wait, to hope, to endure uncertainty. It made the act of connection feel costly in time, and cost often makes things feel precious. That's why, even now, a letter can feel like a small treasure. Not because it is rare, but because it is deliberate. And that brings us back to the quiet lesson hidden inside this history. If you want more calm in your life, you don't always need more speed. Sometimes you need one slower act that tells your nervous system, there is time. A letter can be that act. And if you're listening to this for sleep, you can take the lesson in a softer way still. You can let your thoughts become like letters, folded gently, sealed, set aside until morning. You do not have to answer everything tonight. You do not have to solve everything. You can place your worries into an imaginary mailbag, tie it shut, and let the night carry it away for a while. Because the night, like the old roads, is patient. So let the story settle. Let the coaching ends go dark. Let the train stations empty. Let the sorting rooms quiet down, the last lamp turned low. Let the ships finish their crossings in your imagination and come to rest at calm docks. And in that stillness, let there be one final, simple ending, like the end of a good letter. May you be safe. May you be warm. May your mind be quiet. May your waiting be gentle. Good night. And if your thoughts wander to distant roads and sealed letters, let them wander softly, the way paper drifts down into a mailbox, quiet, weightless, and ready to become sleep.